have to.
Okay.
Are you still in there?
In the front room there, so sometimes I get distracted with people.
Okay.
Call the meeting. Are we ready now? I think we have Carly on now, so we'll call the meeting back to order. Today, our work session is about 2021 legislation, and we did not have anyone addressing the board. Did we, Beth? Thank you. We'll move on to the strategic planning. Oh, is that this? Yeah, this is school board. We don't have that on me.
No, we got legislation.
Yeah, I don't know why that's in there. Okay, so we'll just go to the report on the 2021 legislation.
Thank you. So what you have in front of you, and we've kind of used this document as our basis in the past, and everybody's got a handout, I think, if they want one in the audience, is the 2021 ASB/SD legislative resolutions. And then on the very back end of that, the last 3 or 4 pages are their standing positions, which don't change very much from year to year. President Mickelson will be in a couple of weeks, I think it is, attending the delegate assembly. So we'll go through these and see if we have any suggestions. If we do have a suggested change, we will have the board we'll put it on we'll write it up after this meeting. We'll put it on the agenda for Monday, and then it has to be in by next Tuesday. So, but you have to have a board action on it. So I don't know that we will, but if we do have a change, we'll do that. So we'll go through these. We'll go through if something catches your eye, you can bring it up. I'll just talk about where they have changes, and some of that stuff has caught my eye. And then in the end, we'll just talk about some priorities in general, and try to get through this here and give Dr. Saban time to do her presentation. So I'm just going to move along. Stop me if you have questions, which is in an attempt to kind of keep going. So the first change for them that wasn't in there last year is A4, which is extracurriculars and free participation. They've taken that off. It's not controversial. There's actually a state law that was passed several years ago that basically says you can't charge for extracurriculars. So they have taken that one off. And then the next one is B1, which has to do with homeschool. And it's about removing the state guidelines for evaluating academic progress and keeping the rest intact there. They want the local control to be able to have some say over it. That hasn't changed. They've just taken out the notion that the state will evaluate, or the state will provide guidelines for evaluating academic progress of students receiving alternative instruction. From my perspective, that isn't a huge change, so I recommend that that's fine. Next is B3. Charter schools, and all they're doing there is saying, or anything out that looks like a charter school or other school type systems. Not controversial for their field there. B6 has to do with school district identification symbols, and then they added end events, and that's for, they're wanting local, all they did was add end events, but the resolution is about school districts having local control about uniquely identifying their school and who can wear what and whatnot, and try not to have the state take that over. Like I said, their actual change here is very small. A new one is B12. That has to do with, and we saw lots of legislation last year on this, school board and school bond elections. There were some that were trying to get like a that it had to combine with the June election with the county, and then there were some where you had to combine in the general election. And this is saying let school boards decide when their elections are within reason. Right now, in even number years, we combine with the city, and in odd number years, when there isn't a primary election in an odd number year, we do it on our own, and usually do that like the last week of school. So I think that's a good idea and a good addition, because it seems to be coming up more and more. B13 is new as well, and it has to do with COVID-19 and governance for that. And it basically says ASB/SD supports school districts maintaining high expectations for learning and recognizes local decision-making is essential during the COVID-19 pandemic. with continued guidance provided by South Dakota Department of Health, Centers for Disease Control, and the South Dakota Department of Education. It's a pretty good idea to have it in there. It's certainly timely, and it's in line with their generally local control within parameters set by the controlling agency. So that one seems to make sense to me anyway. C1 is a deletion. It's in school. This is in school finance, and this is one where they said they wrapped it up into another one. It shows up in C7. We'll talk about that more in a little bit. C4 is capital outlay. What they did here is change that last year the $2,800 limit for schools, and it isn't us. It's like an AGAR type school with a lot of valuation and very few kids. That limit got moved from $2,800 to $3,400, but they left the key to this is they left in here that they want, ASBSD wants schools to go up to the old $3 levy. Now, my perspective on this is I generally agree with that, but last year they kind of gave, there was a compromise and they gave on three things, and the one that affected us is now it's not 3% inflation, whichever is less, it's 3%. So that was good, and I kind of thought it was a compromise. So to me, I would almost just strike this one because we used to be $3. We've been living under this for a few years now, and we got, I believe, the state compromised and gave on three different issues. And the one, like I said, the one that matters us is now it's 3%. It isn't, or inflation, whichever is less. I don't know that it's terrible to have this in here, but I would hate to keep pounding on them after we kind of had a deal last year. So I don't know how you guys feel about it, but I don't think it's something we should really be pushing because they gave a little bit last year. C7 is the state aid issue. It generally talks about, I mean, there is a little bit of language in here that might be okay, but it generally talks about funding the state should fund the formula. And it talks about 3% or inflation, whichever is less. And I think I did see a sentence in here, I didn't mark it off though, that talks about, you know, should be at least that. Well, it should be at least that. It's I think we got a change in here a few years ago and it got taken out that it should be 3% or inflation, whichever is greater, or at least just 3%, because, you know, you guys have seen the data. The state doesn't live at 3% inflation, whichever is less. They don't fund their employees at 3% inflation, whichever is less, and 85% or 80 to 85% of our salaries, our expenditures in the general fund is our salaries and benefits. And they also don't, they talk about the providers, those rates go up more than 3% or inflation, whichever, they go up more than our rate does too. Because we are a Medicaid provider for education services, and that rate has gone up more than what our rate goes up. So I think it's a little to sit there and say, well, this year's 1.5%. It'd be great to get the 1.5. I mean, that's fine if the whole state budget is low, but in a typical year when the whole state budget isn't low, 3% inflation, whichever is less, isn't enough. And I do think they maybe should look at putting in a goal of what that actual amount should be that you could live with. And then you can say, because when they don't have the money, you don't get it. They can go in and say, okay, but if we can't afford it, then you have to go in and make the change. But to pretend that in a typical year when state budget is growing 4 or 5 or 6%, 3% of inflation, whichever is less, is enough. And if you just fund that, we'll be happy. It shouldn't be that way. So that's C7. New one is C10. That has to do with COVID funding and just they support additional state and federal funding for schools due to unforeseen and continued expenses incurred during the COVID pandemic. We'll talk about that one just a little bit more, about a specific possible remedy that most groups have been talking about, in ASBSD as well. So I'll touch on that in just a second. I guess that is all the changes. So the three issues I would bring up, and then I'd call on our lobbyists, either one or both, if they would like to comment as well. But I'll talk to you about three issues that we've talked about. One is the one I just harped on. Maybe it's 3% or inflation, whichever is more, instead of 3% inflation, whichever is less. Knowing that if the whole state budget's only going up 2%, they're going to adjust ours down to 2%. But we talked about that. And then when I talked about the COVID funding, I said here, I'll bring that issue up in a second here. Many districts and groups are talking about, and I think it's a good idea, for FY21, the year we're in, instead of funding on this year's enrollment, if they look at funding on either this year's enrollment or last year's enrollment, because many school districts were one, we talked about it at the last school board meeting, we have a significant decrease in students due to kindergartners not, 5-year-olds not coming to kindergarten. We saw a lot of that. Doug went over that in the enrollment report. And then also our homeschool numbers doubled for November. And that isn't just a local phenomenon. It's kind of going on in most districts across the state. So the state budgeted the money last year. And so the money is there in the budget. So maybe that's something all schools can go in with as a proposal. And then this one's kind of it doesn't just affect us, but it hasn't been talked about widely, and we'd just like to get the conversation started on it. There's what we call 13, 28, 11 students. They're kids whose parents need them in a residential treatment center. And the parent can place them, and then the state takes care of moving the state aid to the right entity. The district doesn't have to pay tuition, but one thing is that if you are on a IEP, you're not eligible to be placed there by the parent. And Deb Mullenberg-Wilson, our special ed director, she has an idea that makes some sense. It's like if the placement has nothing to do with the IEP team could waive that requirement, and then they could be treated just like a regular education student. I don't think it should be overly controversial. You don't want parents placing their students for special ed services, but if it's not related to that, the IEP team could waive that, and then they could go. And I told her this was going to be brought up today, so if you have a question, she's probably ready to answer it. But those are three things we've discussed, in addition to just these general items from ASBSD, three things we've talked about that are kind of proactive issues for us, for the legislature, and then of course we'll be responding to all the bills that affect education.
With the 3% or whichever greater, could it also be in case, say, everything at the state is just at 2% or whatever the state funding is across the board too, so that it could show some compromise on our position? Yeah,
you could put that in the language. And what we found has happened in the past is if they don't have the money to fund even the 3% inflation, whichever is less, they just change which is their right to do every year. I'm not criticizing. They change the law and put the number down, but we could put that in there that if the whole state budget only goes up 1%, this wouldn't exceed that. And it looks like we're willing then to compromise, which we would be. We don't expect, when everybody else is flat funded, we don't expect to get 4%. Mm-hmm. But when everybody else is going up 5 or 6%, it's not real great to go up 2 and then be told, well, we funded the formula. So,
no, I think that language would be, at least show that we're not, like my dad would say, we're not trying to be hogs get slaughtered. We want to do what's fair.
So do you, are you interested in us trying to amend that item to get the, item 7 there, C7, that language, and then you could take it to them?
And then vote on that at Monday.
We'll write that up and bring it to the board on Monday. And then if you pass it, then President Mickelson can take it to them. And we'll send it in so they have it in advance, and then you can defend it.
Yeah, that'd be great, because I think last time I had to do it on fly.
Yeah, right. I think this meeting was a little later in the week, a little later in the month of November, and so,
I'd appreciate that. I do have a question then on the residential treatment. Is that something also our families would want to, is that
Yeah, it isn't something our families would appreciate.
Yeah,
right
yeah.
then.
Yeah. Thank you. I would be amenable to them exploring that as well, that language as well.
So we could do that we could try to get that added onto here, if that's what you'd like, or we can also, if it doesn't get added on here, we can pursue it through our lobbyists to try to get a sponsor and introduce, but we can write that up for this as well as a possible thing. I don't know that many districts will say, oh yeah, that's a fabulous idea, but really it is. It's a family-friendly thing, and a lot of districts probably don't ever encounter it. It's kind of
And there was discussion on Wednesday night's call with Wade Pogany about this year's enrollment or last year's, whichever is greater. So I would think as a whole, I was kind of surprised it actually wasn't in this. Is that just because it's kind of a new discussion that's come up, or?
Yeah, yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I saw the handout from that meeting, and
Yeah.
I know Wade discussed that, and maybe it would be more specific to this one on item 10, this new one, there's specifically lists that in there.
could
So
be
we can put that in there as
incorporated
well, yeah. Yep, we can sure do that.
I'll try. I mean, if they say no, we'll just still pursue it through.
Yeah.
Right. And other groups are talking, other school groups are talking about it as well, because it isn't, I know it hasn't affected every school, but it's affected a lot of schools. I introduced them to individually, but just for the public, our two lobbyists are here, Larry Nelson and Sam Nelson, and if you have any questions for them, they're ready to answer them. Or do you guys have anything?
I guess real quick, probably everybody who's in the election, you're going to have about turnover, body, line, and how a lot of things got put kind of on hold and back over the legislators got involved now. But it was passed.
Thank you, both of you, for your service out in Pierre, and appreciate all the work you do for our public school system. It's greatly appreciated by us.
Will we do with those new legislators, will we have a breakfast as we've done in the past?
Yeah, I think that's the next step, is what we want to do for a process, what you've typically done, and anything else that you want to do. It sounds like that's been a good thing, so we can start getting those set up.
That'd be great.
Catch them early. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And maybe assign seats, because they all sort of clustered together last year.
Yeah, well, or maybe even with
Made it
COVID,
hard for us to infiltrate the tables.
if we have to do a couple even
Yeah.
to space out people,
Mhm.
and then we could still have
Well,
good
true, with COVID,
conversations.
yeah.
Yeah,
We'll have to think things through differently anyway.
Thank you.
Yeah, November comes awfully quick.
I know, it's like, we're going to be in
Doesn't feel
January.
like it today,
I
but
know,
yes.
and then we have the holidays. So that will be very good to do that, especially with the new people coming in. But I'm excited. I think there's some good pro-education people that are coming on board, and leadership's going to change, I think, too. So it'll be good.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Todd.
I think I'm going to face all of you. It's much better than standing with my back toward you. Well, this is just kind of a precursor and to do some high-level thinking around strategic planning and continuous improvement, because as we know, one of the things that's kind of awaiting our attention is our strategic plan and moving towards a revised version of that kind of by the time we start school next year. Everything, you know, you've heard me talk about the watermark of COVID. This is one of those things where we've kind of had the business at hand, but we need to start thinking now about what's coming ahead. So, you know, this is our goal. We need to keep moving forward, and we need to think about what our goals are going to be kind of for this next phase of the journey. And we'll talk, just like I said, at a high level. But really what we're doing is we're going to define that big picture and continue looking at what's happened and where we want to go, what the effects are kind of our current reality, as well as what we already have been working on and what we know to be true. Understanding what the purpose is of those goals and our intent to move forward, reviewing the information that we have, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. But we have a lot of good data, even though we missed some things last spring. Determine what our areas of focus are going to be. Some things I'm sure that we'll want to continue that are already in motion, as well as maybe some things that we want to address. Looking for themes as we do some work second semester. Establishing what those priorities are going to be moving forward, and then taking action, and then really reporting progress. That's kind of that whole overview of a process, and we'll talk more about that too, but that's the big picture of how we move forward together. Of course, you know that we have a current strategic plan, and within that plan, these were kind of those big areas that were identified that you've been working from. Student outcomes, climate and culture, district staff, and community engagement. And of course, within each of those areas, there have been a lot of great things that the district's been working on, and that covered some really comprehensive areas. So if we think about where we are right now, we've been reviewing our fall data. You've had some reports and board meetings, and we are reviewing and reporting on current strategic plan, measurable goal outcomes, and we're going to do that at our December board meeting. We're in the process right now of doing what you've seen happen in years prior, where we kind of do a real comprehensive report on where we are and what's been accomplished. And this one will be kind of with that intent to not necessarily bring closure, but to really know clearly where are we with the things that we set out to do, and where are we then as we either pick that up and continue moving forward, or as we say, you know, this has become just kind of now part of the fabric of what we're doing. It no longer needs to be a specific area of focus, or we want to pivot and maybe take a new direction with something. And then that will set us up well for kind of the visioning work that will start at our December 12th date, just kind of looking at how do we want to move forward and what's the process, and we'll talk about that too. So then we ask, where do we want to go? And to do that, we need to be about identifying some of our anchor metrics. And one of the things that we'll talk about today is just the mindset around a strategic plan. Kind of the you know, flavor of the day is to develop a 3-year, a 5-year, and you kind of set these lofty out there goals that are kind of big picture goals, and then you get to the end of it and you say, okay, well now we got to either start over or we need a new plan, when in fact a lot of the things stay in place no matter what. And that's why I kind of refer to those as anchor metrics. And I'll define what that is, but there are things that we're going to monitor no matter what. Then we need to identify what are those critical areas of need. Either it's an ongoing area, it's something new we've noticed, maybe it looks a little different after some of our lost learning last spring, or it's emerged with the data that we've gotten over the last year or two. And then, of course, identifying areas for new growth. What are those things that we want to undertake that are new initiatives or new things that have emerged where we really want to go in a specific direction? So when I talk about anchor metrics, these are the ones that I pulled kind of that we've been monitoring as part of our current strategic plan that really are part of best practice and part of what districts would always be monitoring. The graduation rate, our elementary reading and math proficiency, what does that look like within specific demographic groups? What does ACT scores tell us? Advanced placement data, and then some of that perceptual data specific to academics. Do you have the courses that you want to have? Are you taking what's offered? Are you, are we seeing kids achieve with some of the supports that we've put in maybe for academic interventions? Then another area of anchor metrics was under climate and culture, looking at safety and security, behavior incidents that are reported, expectations around are things done free from bias? Do we have accountability the way that we think it should look? And what are the attitudes that people have about what we provide in our schools? Oops, got too fast. I hit my button. Then when we look at some anchor metrics for district staff, it's what does our workforce diversity look like? Are we making progress in that area? What are the retention rates of the staff that we have? Are we keeping them? Are they coming and then staying? And then what are we doing for professional practice? And are we meeting the needs of people as they try to grow in their areas where they serve our district? And then finally, some of those anchor metrics around community engagement, and these cover a lot, but what do we, sorry, I keep hitting my mouse pad. What do we have in place for perceptual data about communication and information, how people get and give information, how we inform people, how we have dialogue about different things that come up in the life of a school district? And then partnerships, are we working well within our community, and are we building connections with families and with business and industry and with our district, other district partners and community partners? So those are some of the things that already exist. And what I would propose is that we kind of begin thinking about what are those anchor metrics that we always are going to report on, be accountable for, and have kind of in place no matter what. We can always add or subtract from that, but we know as part of best practice, there are things that we're going to keep in place. And when we think about that in relationship to continuous improvement, we know that we are always looking at growth, and we want to see growth over time. We want to be able to look at why we're growing and point to some specific initiatives or specific steps that we've taken to make those indicators look like they are moving in the right direction. But we don't typically stop or start those kinds of things. So then we think about how do we get there? And one of the things that we need to think about is what we want to do. So things like structured listening, focus groups, a representative group that we may want to convene, and have those facilitated conversations where we're asking really good questions about some of the initiatives, where we've been, what we're currently doing, and what people's hopes and dreams are for the future. We want to make sure that we include multiple voices. We need to hear from lots of different areas of our district, and those need to really be future focused, because that's where we're moving now, is what do we want to envision as we continue to move forward from this year. And then we decide how we do that, the format that we want to use, where we're going to do that, the locations that we have, our timeline for doing that during our second semester, and then the audiences that we're going to include. Now, all of that, again, has that watermark of COVID, and some of the ways that we have typically convened people may work if we take some measures for social distancing. We could probably think about doing some things virtually or a combination. We also have existing feedback mechanisms in our district. We have that in our community. We have groups that are more than willing to partner with us, and so we just need to begin thinking about how we want to access all of those partners. So during September and October, we've been analyzing that fall data. We've reviewed those current strategic plan outcomes, and we'll be presenting that. And we've been thinking about what are those feedback structures. So in November and December, I want to have us think more about those anchor metrics, think about areas maybe of priority based on the data that we have currently or what we know as we get that analysis, and then really think about establishing that second semester engagement plan and getting a roadmap that we can start to map out with actual dates and activities. One of the things that I think we always need to think about is what is the experience that people have as they come through our school district. What is it like to be a student at any level in our school district? What is it like to be a staff member? What's the experience of people working in our different departments or in our schools? What is our community experience relationship to our school district? And then, of course, what do people that have come through our school district and then leave us and go on to do things in our in our communities and beyond, what was that experience like? Because when we're able to focus on experience, that's really where we can begin to craft what our actions are and what we do to continue to create that great experience. And so things like within academics, the outcomes that we want to see related to interventions and acceleration, interest of our students. What do we do for innovation, exploration, our completion, and what does that look like then moving into higher ed? So those are some examples. Outcomes maybe of experience in professional learning. We want to know what the experience is that impacts teaching and learning, and what does it look like for community connections, and how are we helping to develop effective partnerships? What can those experiences tell us about what we do moving forward? And then finally, the opportunities that people have. Is there good inclusion? Are people connected? Is there a diversity of opportunity, and do we value the diversity of our people, and how do we reflect that in our classrooms? And then the equity of experience. Do people have the ability to access the things that they want or need to access, and how does that look if you are limited maybe with language or with income or proximity, any of those things that we want to make sure that we're attending to as a school district and how we respond. I love this quote by John Maxwell. He says, "Improvement comes to the steady people who keep working at getting better. If you have a quick fix mindset, then you need to shift to continuous improvement." And that's really what I think I want us to think most about is, what does continuous improvement look like? And how do we go about all of those systems? And here's that big picture of how continuous improvement needs to look in a district. We always need to be focused on students. We always need to know what we're doing for targeting some of our interventions so that we know exactly what we're aiming at and why, and what the outcome is that we want to see, and what the indicators are that help us know if we're successful with that continuous improvement mindset. So it's those district goals, those big picture pieces that we set out. It's then what that translates to for levels or departments. What does it look like at high school, middle school, elementary? And then what does that look like within the school improvement planning process? How is that reflected so that we're also focusing those efforts at a school level? And then how does that look when we get to a grade level, or we call those professional learning communities, when those professionals are getting together, looking at specific data and looking at their practice to impact things? So then in my own classroom, if I'm a teacher, what does that look like for what I'm doing professionally to continue growing and to be accountable for the teacher, or for the students that I work with? And then right down to that student level. I've been so pleased to see how we do student goal setting, and do they see the connection between what they're doing in their own learning and how that impacts their progress. They're able to say, and here's how I contribute to my classroom getting better, here's how that looks for our whole school, and then it goes right back up to where we see that impact at all levels. And so that's that good, healthy picture of continuous improvement in a district. Here's another way that we can characterize that. Those big goals, what are our outcomes, the strategies we use, how we measure our success. We look at the results we get, and it keeps us into that continuous cycle, all centered around our mission of educating our students and providing them with a great education. And here's just another picture of that. Where are we? What are we about? Where do we want to be? All of that good cycle that just keeps moving forward and really isn't a stop and a start or a beginning and an end. It's a continuous fluid process. And finally, my personal favorite of kind of how that translates out to the plans that we put in place is just that really simple act of planning well, doing what we said we're going to do, studying what the effects are and the results are, acting on those, and then that tells us what do we plan for next. So when we think about kind of that big picture process, this is another quote: "To remain on the cutting edge, successful organizations need to create a tension between what is working now and pushing for what could be." And that's what we should be about always, and what this district has already done a great job of doing. Now we just need to begin kind of planning for that next leg of the journey and really doing some good processes over the second semester that we'll identify, carrying those out, and then hopefully by next July, when we celebrate the anniversary of our school district, we're able to be clear with kind of that vision. We've had great feedback and input. People feel part of the work of our district, and we just keep moving forward to do great things for our students. So this is, again, just to kind of get us ready to begin thinking about that process and what we have in front of us, which is exciting work. For me, it gives me great hope to focus out into the future. We've all been very, in the moment as our year has unfolded, and we have to still be thinking about the future of our school district, because we do a great job, and we've had odd circumstances, but school will continue, and our school district will continue to serve our community well. Questions or comments about that from anybody?
I would just like to say, this looks great, and I'm looking forward to this process because I wasn't involved with the initial process. I know Kate and Carly and Todd were, and Nan and I were not. And so to go forward with the excellent services we already have in the Sioux Falls School District, and then looking what we need to change, what's worked, and going forward so we can continue to provide great educational opportunities in the community of Sioux Falls is always been our goal. So I look forward to doing this process with you, Dr. Skaven, and thanks for presenting this. I believe in December we're having an in-depth meeting about this to kind of pinpoint some more things on this and kind of work on these goals, but thank you for your work on all of this.
Yeah, and I too, I just want to commend our staff. When I look over the work that's been accomplished with this current version of the strategic plan, it's lots of really good stuff. So it'll be exciting to kind of see where we are now and then project forward that they're amazing. They're a great group.
And that's what I commend the people who did this past one, did such a good job that we're not having to throw it out and start all over. It's a continuous effort to do this, so thank you.
Yeah, well, unmanaged momentum soon dissipates, so it's so critically important, and I think you coined it really well talking about the anchor matrix and that best practices in keeping what has shown to be a great resource or great goals for us and measurement tools today and what that will look like in the future. So it has that fluidity and really thought out process so far, and you're really adding a lot of various stakeholders to the process and giving voice to people and what they're passionate about, and ultimately that impact of the student. So this will be a fun journey.
It's exciting. I mean, it's yeah, like you said, I've been through a few cycles of these, but what I think we've always shown is our strategic plan is it's living, it's breathing, and we continually evolve it. And I think that that's what really truly makes us a great school district, is that we just keep looking at it, we keep looking at the data and figuring out what can we do better and where can we move our district further. Yeah, so this is exciting to start on this endeavor again. Or not start, but continue.
We'll go on to board committee reports. Nan, do you have any reports?
I do. Well, the foundation, I have a report, 3 different reports. The foundation report, Allison is still out on maternity leave. We did give the first teacher grants out, beginning of school now, but it's gone quickly. This is our next meeting. So we gave out 61 teacher grants to 26 different schools represented. We brought treats as a gesture of gratitude to the IPC staff. New business, the Public Schools Proud event, which was originally scheduled for November 5th at the Sanford Barn. Thanks to Sanford for offering up that space. That will be postponed. We're looking at tying in a legacy event, maybe a smaller pre-event before the State of the School event to connect retired teachers, administrator, board members to the mission of the district, and that ultimately, cultivating existing donors as well as some new donors through that, and at the end of the day, just that connection back to the school district. So incorporating some sort of legacy event. We currently have 100% board giving on the foundation board, which is just critically important when we're going out fundraising. We had a recap of the state of the school district, the event that we had online. That raised $34,000. Expenses were right about $6,000, so we netted about $27,000. Not only was the dollar amount raised, we're happy with that, but that we had 654 people participate, which is 300 more than we've had in the past. For insurance, since Carly isn't here, we reviewed the Hayes report. That's insurance plan performance. Right now, it's favorably performing. Revenues exceed expenses by about, Todd, is it about 3.7 million currently? Okay. Our stop loss provider will continue to be Voya. And then Sports Authority, as it pertains more to the community at large and that influence that the Sports Authority has with the sports of the district. The NCAA, we will be the host city for several events. 2024 will be Division I hockey regionals. 2024 will also be the Division II women's volleyball championships here. 2026 Division II men's wrestling. 2026 Division I men's hockey regionals. So that's exciting news. And let's see, somebody also report on the city-county meeting that we had. So if there's anything of relevancy. I mean, it was all relevant, but Dr. Saban did a nice job reporting on that. The group just giving them an update. And we were a small group, but a passionate group that was there. And those tend to be interesting meetings, and I think they have potential. That's it.
I think the only one I have to report on is policy, and thank you, Andrea, because I didn't have my email on me, but the policies that will be up are GBEA nepotism, GBEAA employee conflict of interest, and GBH staff participation in community activities. And these are just going to be quick review revised because they didn't recommend any changes for this year. So, so those will be just up and down. And then and that's it.
Thank you. I have, let's see, a few. So Sioux Empire Leadership Council, we met in Thrive, and Shelley Unruh's group that Todd's serving on that board, the Housing Authority, they presented. We discussed about that. They touched a little bit about still the former Lincoln Elementary land, talking about that a little bit, but just talking about, especially with the new businesses coming to Sioux Falls and so forth, how the need for affordable housing, accessible housing in our community is needed. Then they talked about the chamber. We had our meeting. They had discussing some policies and so forth. They've sent out a survey to their chamber members regarding the city council first reading now of the mask mandate, and they're going to reveal those results soon. Just several other events still going on. They did have their annual event. It was very well attended. We chose not to, just for social distance, not to participate this year, but they did have a good event for the chamber. Budget, we're meeting later today. We'll have the report at the board meeting on Monday for the first quarter on that. Let's see. Oh, and ASB-SD, we just talked about that. So end of this month, I'm the delegate for that assembly that, based on what we vote on Monday, make those presentations and so forth. So, thank you. Carly, do you have anything? Now we can.
Yep. Okay. I was just going to add to Leanne's report for insurance that we had about 7,600 members that were insured, and they were able to tell us that 1,100 of them were tested in some way for COVID. We had been asked questions about that. That could be either an actual COVID test or an antibody test that was done. We have had a 6% decrease in claim amount for the last rolling 12 months, so that is down. Obviously, a savings that way, but not necessarily a great thing, as probably a lot of people who are just not taking care that should be. And so we want to obviously encourage people to use the benefits that they have and help when they need it. We are talking about a potential for a premium holiday, so with that savings, that's something that we're looking at as well. And we are also, we have a new wellness plan vendor currently that we're using, and then we're also have an RFP out for some programs that we'll be reviewing to implement for next year. So always trying to keep that fresh and be competitive and make sure that our employees have the option to have great health care and great incentives to stay active and do their preventative care, so that long term will keep us all healthier and save us money. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Carly. Anything else for the good of the board? Seeing none, do I have a motion for adjournment?
So moved.
Do I have a motion and a second? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned.